"Your poor old face is becoming an embarrassment to this family," my daughter-in-law announced at Christmas dinner. My son David nodded in agreement. Finally, someone said it. I stood up slowly, folding my napkin with the dignity I'd maintained for 67 years. "Then I'm leaving." That's when David's phone rang. His boss's voice carried across the suddenly silent dining room. "Did you know your mother just made the Forbes cover? If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. But let me back up and tell you how we got to that moment. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. Even after Harold passed 3 years ago, I'd spent weeks preparing, just like I had for 43 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood. My famous sugar cookies with the secret ingredient that made neighbors beg for the recipe. Prime rib that Harold used to say was better than any restaurant. Homemade cranberry sauce that took 2 days to perfect. I'd invited David and Brittany, hoping this year might be different. Maybe this year, Brittany would actually speak to me without that condescending tone she'd perfected since marrying my son. Maybe David would remember I raised him as a single mother for 5 years when his father was overseas, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and him in Little League. "Mom, this house is so dated," Brittany had said the moment she walked in, surveying my living room like it was a crime scene. "When are you going to modernize?" I'd served dinner on my grandmother's china, the good crystal Harold had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. Everything perfect, just like always. That's when Brittany dropped her bomb about my appearance being embarrassing. Apparently, my gray hair and laugh lines were offensive to her Instagram aesthetic. David's phone call changed everything in that instant. I watched his face drain of color as his boss continued talking. Something about a viral video, something about my cookies, something about Forbes wanting an exclusive interview. I smiled sweetly at both of them, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. "Merry Christmas," I called over my shoulder. "I'll be expecting an apology when you figure out what you just lost." The irony wasn't lost on me that my embarrassing old face was about to become very profitable. But they didn't know that yet. The video that changed my life was posted by accident. My neighbor's 8-year-old granddaughter, Emma, had been visiting when I was teaching her my cookie recipe. She'd been recording herself helping when she caught me adding my secret ingredient, a tiny pinch of lavender from my garden and a drop of vanilla extract I made myself. "Grandma Maggie," she'd said into her phone, "makes the most amazing cookies ever. Look, she grows her own herbs and makes her own vanilla." I'd laughed, thinking nothing of it when she asked to post it on something called TikTok. "Of course, sweetheart. Maybe other kids will want to learn too." That was 3 weeks ago. The video now had 2 million views. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since Christmas night. Food Network wanted to discuss a show. A publisher called about a cookbook deal. 3 different investors wanted to talk about licensing my recipes. And yes, Forbes had reached out for their upcoming feature on senior entrepreneurs disrupting traditional industries. I sat in my kitchen that morning after Christmas, still wearing yesterday's good dress, staring at the pile of business cards and contact information I'd scribbled on napkins. David had called 4 times. I'd let every single call go to voicemail. "Mom, please call me back," his latest message had said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Brittany didn't mean anything by what she said. Can we talk?" Oh, there'd been no misunderstanding. After 38 years of teaching elementary school, I knew exactly how to read between the lines. Brittany had meant every word, and David's agreement had been the final straw. But here's what they didn't know about their embarrassing mother. I'd been quietly saving and investing Harold's life insurance money for 3 years. I owned my house outright, and I'd been dreaming of starting my own business since I was 25, back when Harold convinced me that teaching was more suitable for a woman with children. Well, Harold was gone. My child was grown, and I was done being suitable. I picked up the phone and called the Forbes reporter back. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Margaret Thompson. I'm ready for that interview." The Forbes interview went better than I'd imagined. Maria Rodriguez was a sharp woman in her 30s who understood exactly what I was trying to build. We talked for 2 hours in my kitchen while I demonstrated the cookie recipe that started everything. "What most people don't realize," I explained while measuring flour, "is that there's an entire generation of knowledge disappearing. My grandmother taught me to make vanilla extract from scratch, to grow culinary herbs, to preserve foods without chemicals. Young people want to learn these skills, but they don't have access to teachers." Maria nodded, taking notes. So you're thinking beyond just cookies? Oh yes, I said, pulling my notebook from the kitchen drawer. I'd been sketching ideas since Christmas. What if there was a platform where seniors could teach traditional skills to younger generations? Cooking, gardening, sewing, woodworking, even old family recipes with stories behind them. I'd been developing this concept for weeks, ever since the TikTok video exploded. The comments had been incredible. Hundreds of young people asking where they could learn these techniques, sharing stories about grandparents they'd lost, begging for more content. We could call it Grandma's Kitchen, I continued, warming to my subject. Not just cooking, but all the traditional skills. Think of it as Airbnb meets Masterclass, but for intergenerational learning. Maria's eyes lit up. Have you done any market research? I laughed, gesturing to my laptop on the counter. 3 weeks of internet deep dives. Do you know how many YouTube videos there are of young people trying to recreate their grandmother's recipes and failing? Thousands. There's a massive market for authentic instruction. The article was scheduled to publish in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I'd been busy. I'd contacted my old colleague Sarah Chen, who'd left teaching to work in tech. She'd agreed to help me build a basic website. I'd also reached out to 5 other seniors in my neighborhood who had incredible skills. Mrs. Patterson with her quilting, Mr. Anderson with his woodworking, Elena Vasquez with her traditional Mexican cooking. David had stopped calling after the 3rd day. Brittany had actually blocked my number, which honestly felt like a gift. But here's the thing about building something from scratch at 67. You don't have time for other people's doubts. Every day felt precious. Every opportunity important. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Website prototype is ready. When can you see it? I smiled, untying my apron. The old Margaret would have asked David's permission first, worried about what the neighbors would think, convinced herself she was too old to start over. The new Margaret? She was just getting started. Sarah's prototype took my breath away. She'd somehow captured exactly what I'd envisioned. A clean, simple website where seniors could create profiles, showcasing their skills, and young people could book sessions either virtually or in person. The beauty of this model, Sarah explained as we sat in her home office, is that it's not just about the skills. It's about connection. Look at these testimonials from your TikTok comments. She pulled up screenshots. My grandmother passed before she could teach me her pierogies recipe. I would pay anything to learn from someone who knew her technique. Another, I'm 22 and can't even sew a button. I need a grandmother figure to teach me basic life skills. The market research was staggering. Sarah had compiled data showing that 60% of Gen Z and younger millennials felt disconnected from traditional skills, while 75% of seniors felt their knowledge was undervalued. We're not just solving a skills gap, I realized aloud. We're solving a loneliness epidemic. Sarah nodded. Exactly. And the financial model works. Seniors set their own rates, we take a small platform fee. Your cookie class could easily charge $50 for a 2-hour session. I'd already lined up my first 5 instructors. Mrs. Patterson was excited about teaching quilting. Elena had 3 different Mexican cooking classes planned. Even grumpy Mr. Anderson had warmed to the idea when I mentioned he could charge $75 to teach someone how to build a proper bookshelf. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling up another screen. I've been getting inquiries. 3 different venture capital firms have reached out since word started spreading about your Forbes feature. My stomach fluttered. Venture capital? 3 months ago, I was grading 3rd-grade math tests. Now I was talking about investors and profit margins. Margaret, Sarah continued, this could be huge, but you need to be prepared for what comes next. If this takes off the way I think it will, your life is going to change dramatically. I thought about David and Brittany, about their embarrassment over my old face. In 6 months, when Grandma's Kitchen was featured in every major publication, would they still think I was the family embarrassment? Actually, I realized I didn't care what they thought anymore. Let's do it, I said. Let's change some lives. Sarah grinned and opened her laptop. In that case, we need to talk about your business plan presentation. The first investor wants to meet next week. My new life was officially beginning. The investor meeting terrified me more than the first day I stood in front of a classroom 40 years ago. Jennifer Walsh from Crossroads Ventures had requested a formal presentation about Grandma's Kitchen, and I'd spent a week preparing slides that Sarah helped me design. I wore my best navy suit, the one I'd bought for Harold's funeral but never worn again, and carried my grandmother's briefcase that I'd found in the attic. If I was going to pitch a business built on intergenerational wisdom, I might as well look the part. Jennifer was younger than my son, probably 35, with the kind of confident energy that comes from making million-dollar decisions before lunch. But she listened intently as I explained the concept, asked smart questions about scalability and market penetration, and seemed genuinely excited about the social impact. "The numbers are compelling," she said, reviewing Sarah's financial projections. "Conservative estimates show you could have 50,000 active users within 18 months, but I'm more interested in the human element. Show me this actually works." That's when I pulled out my secret weapon. "I've been beta testing for 2 weeks," I said, opening my laptop. "We have 15 seniors offering classes and 43 students enrolled. Mrs. Patterson has a waiting list for her quilting workshop. Elena's Salsa Verde class sold out in 6 hours. I showed her the testimonials that had been pouring in. A college student who'd finally learned to make her late grandmother's biscuits. A young father who'd taken Mr. Anderson's basic carpentry class to build his daughter a dollhouse. A recent graduate who'd learned to mend clothes instead of throwing them away after taking my sewing basics workshop. This isn't just about skills," I continued, hitting my stride. "It's about preserving cultural knowledge that's disappearing with each generation. It's about giving seniors a sense of purpose and income. It's about building communities across age gaps." Jennifer leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" $200,000 for platform development, marketing, and operational costs for the first year, I said, grateful that Sarah had coached me on this part, in exchange for 20% equity. 3 days later, Jennifer called with an offer, $300,000 for 25%. I accepted. The Forbes article published that week with a cover photo of me teaching Emma how to make cookies, my hands guiding her small ones as we rolled dough. The headline read, "The Grandmother Revolution, How One Woman's Cookie Recipe is Disrupting Education." David called that morning. For the first time in weeks, I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice strange. "I saw the Forbes article. I had no idea you were... Why didn't you tell me?" I looked out my kitchen window at the herb garden I'd been expanding. "When would I have told you, David? Between being called an embarrassment and being asked to modernize my appearance?" The silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "Can we talk? In person?" "Of course," I replied. "You can book a session through my website like everyone else." The irony of my son booking a cooking class to talk to his mother wasn't lost on either of us. David arrived at my house the following Saturday, looking uncomfortable and carrying flowers. Store-bought roses that probably cost $40 and had no scent. "These are nice," I said, accepting them gracefully. "Though next time, I could teach you how to arrange flowers from my garden." Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter took that workshop last week and made the most beautiful centerpiece. He followed me into the kitchen, where I'd set up for the class he'd technically paid for. Traditional Sunday pot roast with root vegetables. $45 well spent, I figured. "Mom, this is awkward," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "I'm sorry about Christmas, about what Brittany said, and about me agreeing with her." I handed him an apron, one of Harold's old ones that said, "Kiss the cook." "Sorry about which part?" "David? Sorry she said it, or sorry you agreed with it?" He tied the apron strings, his cheeks reddening. "Both. All of it. I never realized how much we'd been dismissing you, taking you for granted." I began arranging ingredients on the counter. "Well, at least you're learning to pay attention now. Hand me those carrots." As we worked together, really worked together for the first time since he was 10 years old, helping me bake Christmas cookies, something shifted between us. I taught him how to properly brown meat for maximum flavor, how to layer vegetables for even cooking, how to make gravy from scratch without lumps. "I always thought cooking was just following directions," he admitted, carefully chopping onions the way I'd shown him. "I didn't realize there was so much technique involved." "Most people don't," I replied. "That's why this business works. Everyone thinks their grandmother was magical, but really she just had knowledge and practice. Knowledge that's worth preserving." The pot roast went into the oven, and we sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the cookies that had started everything. David was quiet for a long moment. "Brittany feels terrible," he finally said. "She wants to apologize." I sipped my coffee slowly. Does she? Or does she want access to whatever benefits she thinks my sudden success might bring? David winced. That's harsh, Mom. Is it wrong? He couldn't meet my eyes, which was answer enough. David, I said gently, I love you. You're my son, and that will never change. But I'm not going backward. I'm not the lonely widow sitting in this house waiting for you to visit anymore. I'm building something important, something that matters. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another booking. Someone in California wanted to learn my cookie recipe via video call. The platform was growing beyond what any of us had imagined. The Forbes article has generated 600 new user registrations this week, I continued. 3 different production companies want to discuss a television show. And next month, I'm keynoting a conference about senior entrepreneurship. David looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Who are you? He asked, but he was smiling. I smiled back. I'm your mother. I'm just finally acting like it. That afternoon, as David left with containers of leftover pot roast and a new appreciation for what his old mother was capable of, I realized something important. I wasn't just teaching people how to cook. I was teaching them, and myself, how to value what we already knew. The embarrassing old woman was gone. In her place stood an entrepreneur, a teacher, and a woman who'd finally remembered her own worth. But this was only the beginning. The real transformation was still to come. 3 months after the Forbes article, I learned that success brings enemies you never expected. I was sitting in my new home office, Harold's old den transformed with modern equipment, when Sarah burst through my front door without knocking. We have a problem, she announced, laptop in hand and panic in her voice. A big one. She set her computer on my desk and showed me a website that made my stomach drop. Wisdom Exchange looked exactly like Grandma's kitchen, down to the color scheme and layout. The tagline read, "Learn traditional skills from experienced seniors," practically identical to ours. They launched this morning, Sarah continued, scrolling through pages that were unmistakably copied from our concept. They have backing from Peterson Industries, and they're offering instructors higher rates than we can match. I stared at the screen, recognizing several faces that had been on our platform just last week. Mrs. Patterson's quilting workshop was now featured prominently on their homepage. Elena's Salsa Verde class had been recreated with a different instructor using almost identical language. How is this legal? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. It's not illegal to copy a business model, Sarah admitted. And we never patented the platform design. Margaret, they're huge. They have marketing budgets we can't compete with. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another instructor had canceled their Grandma's Kitchen classes. That made 12 this week. I'd spent 40 years teaching children, which meant I recognized bullying when I saw it. Peterson Industries was using their resources to crush a small business founded by a 67-year-old woman they clearly didn't consider a threat worth respecting. Well, they were about to learn something about underestimating grandmothers. Sarah, I said calmly, closing the laptop, do you remember why I became a teacher instead of a principal? Even though I was qualified for administration? She shook her head, confused by the apparent subject change. Because I preferred working directly with children rather than playing politics. But that doesn't mean I never learned how the game is played. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I wanted. Sometimes you don't fight bullies by playing fair. Sometimes you fight them by being smarter. I dialed Maria Rodriguez from Forbes. Maria, it's Margaret Thompson. I have a story for you about corporate theft and ageism that I think your readers would find very interesting. The war for Grandma's Kitchen was about to begin. The Forbes expose on Peterson Industries hit like a tsunami. Maria had done her research thoroughly, interviewing the instructors who'd been poached, documenting the identical features between platforms, and most damaging of all, uncovering internal Peterson emails referring to our geriatric competition that could be easily eliminated. The article's headline read, "David versus Goliath, How Corporate Giants Target Senior Entrepreneurs." The photo showed me sitting in my kitchen next to a screenshot of Peterson's platform, with a caption that made my teacher's heart proud. Some lessons can't be bought, they have to be earned. But Peterson's response was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours of the article's publication, they'd launched a legal challenge claiming we'd stolen their trade secrets. Their army of lawyers filed injunctions, trying to shut down our platform while the case was pending. It's harassment, Jennifer Walsh explained during an emergency meeting in my living room. They know they'll lose in court, but they're hoping to drain our resources fighting them. It's a common tactic against smaller competitors. I served coffee and cookies. Stress baking had become my new hobby. While Jennifer, Sarah, and I discussed our options, the legal fees alone could bankrupt us within months. There's another problem, Sarah added reluctantly. David called me directly. He wants to meet with you about a business proposition. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. My son called you. About my business? He says he has a solution to the Peterson problem. He wants to discuss it tonight. Something cold settled in my stomach. David worked in corporate consulting. He'd never shown interest in my business beyond our reconciliation conversation. And now, suddenly, he had solutions to corporate legal warfare. Tell him he can book an appointment through our website like any other consultation, I said quietly. That evening, David arrived with Brittany in tow, the first time I'd seen her since Christmas. She was carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the smile she'd perfected for her social media photos. Mom, David said, settling onto my couch like he owned it. Brittany and I have been talking. We want to help with your business challenges. How thoughtful, I replied, noticing how Brittany's eyes immediately started cataloging my living room, probably calculating real estate values. We know people, Brittany added, leaning forward with sudden enthusiasm. David's firm has connections with Peterson Industries. We could negotiate a partnership instead of this legal battle. The room went very quiet. I set down my coffee cup and studied my son's face, reading the expression I remembered from his teenage years when he'd been caught in a lie. A partnership, I repeated slowly, with the company that's trying to destroy my business. Think about it practically, Mom, David continued. You could maintain creative control while they handle operations and marketing. Everyone wins. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the herb garden that had started this whole journey. Behind me, I could hear Brittany whispering urgently to David about closing the deal. That's when I realized the truth that hit me like a physical blow. My own son was working for Peterson Industries. Get out, I said quietly, not turning around. Mom, I said, get out of my house. I faced them, and something in my expression made them both stand up quickly. Both of you. Now. The real battle was just beginning. The revelation about David's betrayal hit harder than Peterson's legal assault. I spent 3 days in my house, ignoring phone calls and surviving on tea and toast, while I processed the fact that my son had tried to sell me out to the very company trying to destroy everything I'd built. Sarah finally showed up with groceries, and Elena, who took one look at me and immediately started making soup. Misha, Elena said firmly, you look terrible. When did you last eat real food? I'm not hungry, I mumbled, but Elena was already pulling vegetables from my refrigerator with the authority of someone who'd raised 7 children. The platform is hemorrhaging users, Sarah reported, setting up her laptop on my kitchen table. Peterson is offering signing bonuses to any instructor who switches. We're down to 8 active teachers and maybe 30 students. I watched Elena work, her hands moving with the confident efficiency I'd tried to capture in our classes. What about the legal situation? Jennifer thinks we can win, but it'll take months and cost everything we have. Meanwhile, Peterson is positioning themselves as the legitimate platform. My doorbell rang, and through the window I saw David's car in my driveway. I was about to tell Sarah to send him away when I noticed he was alone. No Brittany in sight. Let him in, I said quietly. But stay close. David looked terrible when he entered, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes. He sat heavily at my kitchen table and put his head in his hands. They fired me this morning, he said without preamble. Peterson Industries. They said my family connections were no longer useful since you refused their offer. Elena continued stirring her soup, but I could see her listening intently. They hired me 6 weeks ago, David continued, his voice breaking. Right after the Forbes article. They said they needed someone who understood your business model, someone with inside access. They offered me twice my normal consulting fee. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. So you've been spying on me for 6 weeks. I thought I was protecting you. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. They said small businesses like yours always fail when they compete with major corporations. They offered a partnership that would have made you rich while letting them handle the hard parts. The hard parts being actually caring about the instructors and students instead of just the profit margins. I realize now how stupid I was, how naive. He wiped his face with his sleeve. They never intended to honor any partnership. They just wanted your user data and instructor contracts. Once they had those, they were going to claim patent infringement and shut you down completely. Sarah had stopped typing. Elena had stopped stirring. The only sound was the clock on my wall ticking away seconds of my son's confession. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so incredibly sorry. I thought I was being smart, being practical. I didn't realize I was destroying the most important thing you'd ever built." I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after 3 days of barely moving. "David, you're my son, and I love you. But right now, you need to leave my house and figure out how to live with what you've done." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Is there any way to fix this?" I looked at Sarah, then at Elena, then back at my broken son. "Maybe, but not today." After he left, Elena set a bowl of soup in front of me. "Eat," she commanded. "We have work to do." For the first time in days, I was actually hungry. The plan that would save Grandma's kitchen came to me at 3 a.m. while I was lying awake thinking about David's confession. Peterson Industries had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the power of grandmothers to protect their own. I called Sarah at 7 a.m. "How quickly can you set up video calls with every instructor who left our platform?" "Margaret, they signed contracts with Peterson. They can't come back without legal consequences." "They don't need to come back. They just need to listen." I was already making coffee, my mind racing with possibilities. "Can you reach them by noon?" 3 hours later, I was looking at a computer screen filled with familiar faces: Mrs. Patterson, Elena, Mr. Anderson, and 12 others who'd built the foundation of our platform. Some looked guilty, others defiant, but they were all listening. "I'm not here to ask you to break your contracts," I began. "I'm here to tell you what Peterson Industries really thinks of us." I read them the internal emails Maria had uncovered, the ones calling us geriatric competition, the ones discussing how to eliminate the grandmother problem, the ones referring to our instructors as expendable assets once they'd extracted our teaching methods. Mrs. Patterson's face grew stormy. "They told me I was a valued educator." "You are," I said firmly, "but not to them. To them, you're just content to be harvested and repackaged." Elena leaned forward on her screen. "What do you want us to do, Margaret?" "Nothing that violates your contracts, but there's something Peterson doesn't understand about the knowledge you all possess." I smiled, feeling the teacher in me emerging. "They think they can replicate 40 years of experience with a script and a camera. They're about to learn why they're wrong." I explained my plan. It was simple, elegant, and completely legal. Peterson had hired our instructors, but they'd hired the personas, not the actual knowledge. Every good teacher knows that information without wisdom is just data. "They can copy your recipes and techniques," I continued, "but they can't copy the stories that make them meaningful. They can film you demonstrating skills, but they can't capture the decades of mistakes and adjustments that make you masters." Anderson chuckled. "So we give them exactly what they paid for. Nothing more, nothing less." "Precisely. Let them discover the difference between following instructions and true teaching." Over the next week, my plan unfolded beautifully. Peterson's new instructors delivered technically accurate classes that were somehow completely lifeless. Students complained that the recipes didn't work, that the techniques felt mechanical, that something essential was missing. Meanwhile, I quietly reached out to the students who'd stayed with Grandma's kitchen. "What if I told you that your favorite instructors were starting to offer private, in-person workshops in their own homes? Nothing to do with any platform, just old-fashioned learning in Grandmother's kitchen?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, Mrs. Patterson was hosting quilting circles in her living room. Elena was teaching small groups in her kitchen. Mr. Anderson had a waiting list for his garage woodworking sessions. Peterson Industries had succeeded in stealing our platform, but they'd unknowingly helped us create something much more powerful, a real community that existed beyond any website or corporate structure. The phone call I'd been waiting for came on Friday morning. "Ms. Thompson? This is Robert Peterson from Peterson Industries. I think we need to talk." I smiled, remembering the 8-year-old boy in my third-grade class who'd thrown the same kind of tantrum when his scheme to copy homework hadn't worked. "Mr. Peterson," I said sweetly, "you can book an appointment through my website like everyone else." But by then, I already knew exactly what I was going to tell him. The meeting with Robert Peterson took place in my living room, because I wanted him to see exactly what he'd been trying to destroy. He arrived with 2 lawyers and a briefcase full of documents, probably expecting to intimidate a lonely old woman into submission. Instead, he found me serving coffee and homemade cookies to Maria Rodriguez from Forbes, who was documenting our conversation for a follow-up article about corporate bullying and the resilience of senior entrepreneurs. "Ms. Thompson," Peterson began, clearly flustered by the reporter's presence, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about our business practices." "Oh, there's been no misunderstanding," I replied, offering him a cookie. "You tried to steal my business model, poach my instructors, and crush my platform through legal intimidation. The only misunderstanding was yours, thinking that grandmothers don't fight back." For the next hour, I watched a 50-year-old CEO learn lessons that any elementary school teacher could have taught him. You can't steal wisdom. You can't corporate structure community. And you definitely can't out-grandmother a grandmother who's found her purpose. "Your platform is failing," I continued matter-of-factly. "Your students are leaving in droves because they can tell the difference between authentic teaching and corporate content creation. Meanwhile, our instructors are busier than ever with private workshops that no platform can control." Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "What do you want?" "I want you to shut down Wisdom Exchange and issue a public apology for your predatory business practices. In exchange, I won't pursue the corporate espionage charges that Maria's investigation has uncovered." His lawyers whispered urgently in his ears. Finally, he nodded stiffly. 3 weeks later, the final Forbes article ran with the headline, "The Grandmother Who Beat Corporate America." The photo showed me in my kitchen, surrounded by Elena, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Anderson, and 15 other seniors who'd become not just instructors but family. David had called that morning, his voice tentative. "Mom, I saw the article. Are you taking new students for forgiveness lessons?" I'd laughed despite myself. "That's a premium course. It requires extensive prerequisites. I'm willing to do the work." Brittany, it turned out, was not. She'd filed for divorce the week after Peterson Industries collapsed, citing irreconcilable differences with David's family situation. Apparently, being related to a Forbes cover story, grandmother wasn't the kind of embarrassment she could handle. As I write this, 6 months later, Grandma's Kitchen has evolved into something beyond what I'd ever imagined. We've partnered with senior centers across the country. 3 universities have incorporated our model into their continuing education programs. The TV show premieres next month, and my cookbook comes out in the spring. But the real measure of success isn't in the numbers or the accolades. It's in the letter I received yesterday from Emma, the 8-year-old who'd started it all with her TikTok video. She's now 10 and has been teaching her friends how to bake cookies using techniques she learned from our classes. "Dear Grandma Margaret," she wrote in careful cursive, "thank you for showing me that knowledge is the best inheritance you can give someone." The embarrassing old woman with the poor face has become something Peterson Industries never understood and could never replicate. A grandmother who realized that her greatest value wasn't in being suitable or quiet or convenient. It was in being exactly who she'd always been, just with better boundaries and a business plan. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead, and at 68, I'm just getting started. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.